Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Annie Acosta, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Kogniz. Before we get started, I wanted to walk you through a few housekeeping items before we get to our topic of how to prepare to prevent active shootings. So let's go through those first. So throughout today's webinar, you can add any questions to the queue, and we will be addressing those at the end. If for some reason we don't get to yours, we'll follow up with you after the webinar, so rest assured your answers will be coming your way. And also in a few days, you'll also receive a copy of this recording so that you can access it or share it with a colleague or a peer. And we appreciate you coming here today to hear three amazing speakers on the topic of preparing and preventing active shootings. So let's go ahead and get started with introductions. So today we have two external speakers who are experts in active shooter prevention. And the first one I'll introduce to you is Chris Grollnek. And he's an award-winning police detective. He's now retired, and he's also a staff non-commissioned officer and veteran of the U.S. Marines. He is a highly sought-after policy expert in the prevention of active shooter and domestic terrorism incidents, and he served as an advisor to the U.S. Congress and Senate, to the Canadian Parliament, to the Australian government, to the Uganda Prime Minister, and others. His background is quite impressive. He's also, you may have seen him in the media. He's been a guest on multiple primetime network television and syndicated radio programs in the past. So we're very happy to have him here today. He has been involved personally in a domestic active shooter event himself. So he speaks from not only from a prevention standpoint, but also from someone who's actually experienced this himself at the police station while he was on duty in McKinney, Texas a few years ago. We're really glad to have him here today. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're also joined today by Rick Shaw, who founded a company called Awareity in 2004, and he serves as its CEO. Rick also founded First Preventers in 2019, and that is a nonprofit organization. And he's a prevention specialist, he's an author, and a trusted advisor to organizations and communities alike, organizations like yours. And since 2001, he's been researching post-incident reports, lawsuits, lessons learned, and other sources of information. And his focus has been on understanding the profile of failed prevention efforts with violent shootings and other related incidents. His research has led him to create really a first of its kind First Preventers program, as well as tools to support that, and really focuses on the disconnects between threat assessment teams, organizations, and communities, and how they can work better together to prevent more incidents, tragedies, and other costly consequences, injuries, lives lost, and bottom line. Rick's research has been featured on social media, and he's also the author of the First Preventers Playbook that we'll cover later in the webinar. And last but not least is my colleague, Mike Whalen. He's going to walk you through some of the highlights of the Kogniz Assure AI platform and tackle an overview of how we might help your organization deal with key safety incidents like workplace violence, occupational hazards, and others. Mike is an account executive here at Kogniz, and he holds a master's degree in information technology. And he spent his career really helping organizations with cutting edge technologies to solve problems, everything from disaster recovery to safety in the workplace and more. He's known internally and externally with our clients for helping them to find very creative solutions to some of the problems that have persisted in the safety space for many years. He has a good level of expertise in artificial intelligence and automation to really proactively detect or respond more quickly to safety incidents. So we are so excited to have all three of them here today. For anybody who's just joining now, welcome. You're here just in time. And Chris, are you ready to go ahead and get started?
I am.
Great.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much, Annie, for having us. I'm humbled to be here with Mike and Rick. On behalf of Rick, who is the CEO and founder of the First Preventers, I just want to say I'm very grateful to be here, given the opportunity to present to you all. I don't come at this from just a position of experience, nor a position of authority, just from a common sense approach to lay out some lessons learned from a personal involvement in an active shooter, as Annie mentioned. And as well as I was one of the first people in the country to write my postgraduate thesis or capstone project on the phenomena of active shooters. So this is all research-based, some lessons that we have learned, and we're happy to be here with Annie and putting this together. So without further ado, let's talk about what an active shooter is, because there's a lot of semantics out there that base around mass shootings, mass killers, etc. So specifically, an active shooter event is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area or confined space. Now that's from the FBI in 2021. They've updated that definition probably about 15 times in the last 10 years. Not much has changed. It kind of is what it is. Talk about run, hide, fight, and the video that the city of Houston came out with. A lot of corporations, companies, individuals, families, schools, etc., use run, hide, fight as a basis starting point. And what happened is we got very used to using run, hide, fight as the concept in which we would move forward, but we forgot to populate it. And with the help of Rick, myself, and about 12 other companies, we're going to add to run, hide, fight, and we're really working to change the national strategy. The reason that it's important to understand beyond run, hide, fight is because incidents are usually over several minutes before the police arrive. Seldomly are there incidents where an active shooter takes place and police are on scene. And tragically, in a couple times we've seen, and we'll see later in the slide deck, police have been on the scene and weren't able to do anything, whether it was physically, mentally, or mandated from a higher calling. So they're over within 10 or 15 minutes, and that means firing started, firing ended, suspect left or suspect was killed, police might have arrived, police might not have arrived. And since police can't teleport to where you are, it's kind of dependent on what we're going to do as individuals. So I'll come at the basis from my family. I would want my family to be able to survive an active shooter, but not by fighting an active shooter. So as we mentioned, because law enforcement arrive on scene, it doesn't really mean the situation is well at hand. There's too many variables to go through in this short time. However, the following events and perspective is going to provide some freedom from critique or criticism. However, it should give you an honest feedback of what happens, because remember, police are human too. They're just like you. So whether we have a fight, flight, or freeze response depends on the level of training. If we look at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, I was eviscerated in the media over this when this first happened because I was critical of the police and the response. The difference is my criticism was misquoted and a correction was issued by all the papers that ran it, to include the Associated Press and Reuters. But I was critical because the person that made the decision was a new incident commander, relatively new incident commander, and ordered all the people outside and treated this as if it were a barricaded person. And that's a little bit next level for, beyond this topic today. However, we don't want to get into what's a barricaded person, what's an active shooter. If there's something active, we want to be able to stop it. And that way we can stop any further death. And that's where prevention is so important. And that's why we're here today. We see 49 killed. That's okay. It's perfect. 49 killed and 53 wounded in Pulse. It's because of failure to act on an active situation left those people barricaded. So, thanks, Annie. And as Orlando showed us, once again, 49 killed, 53 wounded. We're not exactly sure yet where those 49 killed came from. Were they people that unfortunately bled out, or were they killed instantly? Because the response was so scattered. So with all due respect to the officers that responded, they did a fantastic job. The problem was the command that actually ordered them out. Thank you. Casualties in the United States from the year 2000 to 2018. These are the stats available. Now that we're in 2022, the 2019 ones will be coming out. However, we see a strong escalation of incidents in volume, number, deaths, and tragically, people will be impacted for the rest of their life, as well as the victims' families that have lost loved ones. Why is this escalating? So many people have taken a look at this recently and decided most of these problems are discernible. We can find out that it's not violence that's upticking, it's our ability to deal with that violence and kind of become immune to it or numb. We want to add the modern problems that are happening right now, such as lockdowns. We've seen an extreme amount of opioid carryover. It's very easy to say COVID-19 is the crux of this. However, this started before COVID-19. COVID-19 further exacerbated the problem, however. We've turned into, not everyone, but a lot of lack of empathy because we're so concerned about our own issues of getting out of the house, not catching coronavirus, and those that are immune to, the desire not to have it or to have it, have a different issue. So there's all these issues that can stack on top. There's underreported domestic abuse. Those are leading to active shooters like the one in Allen, Texas in 2021 that took 4 lives, in 2020. So the media is polarizing these events. They're giving you a left or a right stance, guns or no guns. And what we're trying to tell you is we can prevent these situations from happening in the first place by simply understanding how they work and a good reporting system. It's also equally important to understand who the audience is when we're talking about this. So I've narrowed it down to something called the 4 Ps, and it's really rudimentary, but it's very easy to remember. The place that these things are happening, where do you go? Do you go to a grocery store, a mall? Do your kids go to school? Are you in higher education? The people that are around you, your kids, your family, or your friends. The perpetrator. How can we find and stop that perpetrator before they become a perpetrator? And finally, the police. And the reason the police are last in that 4P section is because the police will not be there if something goes wrong until it's over. So we want to reduce it to understanding who the perpetrator could be, the people around us and how they're going to act, and maybe standardizing that response so we don't have to respond. And we can do that by taking care of the place. And that's why it's from left to right. We're going to go through this quickly because we talked about a barricaded person and an active shooter, and the police priority of lives assessment before they do anything. They have a priority of lives assessment they have to do in their head, and it's instantaneous. And they worry about hostage and victims, innocent bystanders, other police and first responders, and then finally the suspect. Well, in an active shooter, that kind of inverts, and we start talking about what happens to stopping that person. So the first thing that happens is the police officer wants to stop that suspect. Then they're worried about hostages and victims. Then they're worried about innocent bystanders. And then they're worried about themselves. That vacillates a little bit, but that's pretty much between 17 and 23 minutes. The police start finding the shooter and it's over by 23 minutes. And typically the shooter is gone or deceased by then. There's a new 3-pronged approach, and it's not very new. It's just we're working on this to roll out as a strategy of PRO, which is prevention, response, and options. And while I've always considered myself an expert on the response and option side, we're really getting into the prevention side of things now to where we can start preventing these things before they start. The strategy for prevention is it's the goal. It's very difficult to measure. So how do you put money into something that you can't measure necessarily? But also, how do you get money out of that as a return on investment? And there is a way. Are there threat indicators? What are the pre-assaultive behaviors? And not just of people, but of the facilities. Do you have your employees and customers and visitors prepared? And do you have a way to prepare them? Do you have a standing plan? And what's your media plan? Because the media will be there. Should something go wrong, obviously. Response is an attack in progress. but equally important, it means that your prevention plan failed. Now, that doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that it is what it is, and you're dealing with something grotesque at the time. Response plan is an action plan. People need to know what to do. The police will respond eventually. Somebody has to stop the perpetrator, and the goal is to save lives, and then the event is over. So training and practice, the very first thing that we need to worry about is prevention. What does prevention look like? Do our employees and visitors know what to do? Do our family members know what to do? Do we have threat assessment teams, which we probably do, but do they know what to do? And how do we notify each other of those different philosophies? I think Rick's going to take over now and probably talk about how the prevention strategy through his platform can really make a difference for you. And then what we're doing here in the first place with our host. So thank you very much to Cosmic. Thank you to Annie. And thank you for Rick for giving me the opportunity to be here with him. Appreciate y'all's attention.
Thank you, Chris. Fantastic setup. What we're going to talk about here next is to really kind of dig into the actual prevention side that you were talking about. So for the last, as in my bio, they talked about, or Annie talked about the fact I've been doing research for the last 20 plus years. And I just wanted to kind of give you the sort of the genesis of how this all started is back in 1999, everybody probably remembers Columbine and the horrific shooting that took place there. The reason I'm showing you this though is because this was over 20 years ago. This is kind of what started me on my research. But the reason I'm showing you this is because today we're still seeing kind of the same, I would say, and we talked about it in the bio, the profile of failed preventions. And that's what we really want to focus in on today is if we can change that profile of failed preventions and we know what those look like, if we can adjust them, then we can move forward to help organizations, schools, communities prevent more incidents. And so what you're looking at right here is basically, I've shown this puzzle pieces, but after the event took place, and after actually almost any event takes place, whether it's a shooting, workplace violence, and other things, is we commonly see stories come out on the news about how all these indicators existed, pre-incident indicators, warning signs, red flags, whatever. That's what these puzzle pieces are, okay? And these puzzle pieces are, they weren't necessarily ignored and they weren't necessarily missed. What the problem is, and if you can go to the next slide, they were scattered. And that's a term that I know Chris used it in his presentation, and it's a term that we really have to embrace and to really understand what that means. I mean, it can just be, the word can just be thrown out there, but scattered is really kind of the problem here, because those same puzzle pieces, and in my research, what I did is I started saying, okay, if all these indicators existed, where were they? And so what you're looking at right now is the timeline, and a lot of people talk about maybe being left of X or left of bang or before bang and all kinds of different terms, but that's really where we need to focus, because look at all of these different indicators, but if you notice, they were scattered. And if they're scattered across, and there's a legend there at the bottom, the top 4 internal and the top 4 external, these are all silos. And these indicators a lot of times get stuck in these silos, and that means your threat assessment team, or you might have a different name for it, but I'm just going to use that term sort of as a general term today. But if your threat assessment team cannot see all of these indicators because they're scattered and splattered all over the place and across silos, then it's very difficult for them to take action, because it's really all about the action at this point. How can we see the bigger picture and take action? So what you're looking at here is what I call it's kind of a visual of the profile of failed prevention, which we'll get into a little bit more in the next coming slide or two. But what you're looking at right now is really what I call the first preventers model. And we talked a little bit about that, but it's really about how can we help organizations and communities to establish their first preventers model to complement their first responders. Because like Chris mentioned, you've got prevention, you've got response, and then you've got options, right? So almost everyone has and knows who their first responders lead person is or lead department is, things like that. But when you ask organizations and even communities who their first preventers are and who's in charge of their first preventers, they don't know. So if you think about how on that previous slide where we had all the different scattered indicators, what I'm trying to show you here is that when we have a way, when we have strategies, when we have templates, we have the right tools, then it's much easier to bring it all together into kind of a smart funnel, if you will, that can bring this information together and then get it to the right people. But go ahead, next slide. But here is kind of where I want to dig into this profile of failed preventions, because what we see are those gaps, silos, and disconnects. I call them GSDs, all right? And they're kind of the invisible threat, if you will. And I want to go through a couple of these because I know we've got people on, many different types of organizations today, maybe representing communities, schools, whatever. But what I want to focus in on is some of the things that we're doing today is they're actually contributing to these gaps, silos, and disconnects, and they're actually scattering our information. So for example, if you look at these boxes that go around the gaps, silos, and disconnects where that funnel used to be, you'll see incident reporting, you'll see systems and departments, law enforcement, nonprofits, and houses of worship, and then community sources. Again, this is not everything that is involved in a community and organization, but pretty common group of resources and sources that we have. Now in the upper left there, you see the incident reporting. I want to talk a little bit about that because incident reporting, and think about your organization and your community as I'm talking about this, but think about how many different hotlines you might have within your organization or within your community. Add in the nonprofits. Then you look at the law enforcement, the see something, say something, the Crime Stoppers, the local, state, and federal levels of each of those, really. A lot of states now are putting in hotlines. And I'm not saying the hotlines are bad. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that what we're seeing is we continue to add new and more incident reporting options. And in a lot of these situations, the information is being scattered into silos, and it's very difficult to get that information out of those silos. We also see there's a lot of new apps, a lot of new text lines, there's web-based options, and then there's trusted adults. We tell within our organization, we tell people to tell their HR, or if you look at the systems and departments box there, we might tell people to come forward to their supervisor or to HR, or security or safety departments might be involved. You might have an ethics hotline, an ombudsman, you might have risk management, legal, all these other things. When people come forward with these puzzle pieces, these indicators, we have to really start digging into where is that information going? Because unfortunately, a lot of times what we see is the human resources and security departments don't always, let's just say they don't share information very well, okay? Sometimes there's turf wars, sometimes there's other issues, maybe they're in different locations. They definitely have a lot of different, HR has their system, security has their system. And so we really have to start really understanding how these gaps, silos, and disconnects are keeping this information from coming together, so that as you look at down below there, the threat assessment teams, the behavioral intervention teams, the behavioral assessment teams, whatever you might call your team, and you may have multiple teams. You might have a workplace violence team. You might have a COVID team now that maybe you didn't have before, right? So how are these teams even, sharing information? Because let's say that something comes in on a hotline, and then somebody, whoever receives that information, maybe they email it to the threat assessment team. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it gets to the workplace violence team, or that the workplace violence team, the information they know from their own app or a hotline or something else, that you've got a trusted adult may come forward to them. They may not know what comes in on the hotline. Okay, so that's really what we're looking at here when we talk about this profile of a failed prevention. And then briefly, I just want to touch on, because it's important, even though I know we have a lot of organizational attendees here today, we have to think about law enforcement. What do they know? You know, we've seen many times how after the fact in the news where something happens, and then unfortunately they'll say, well, law enforcement knew about this individual, but the organization did not. Okay, now I'm not faulting or pointing fingers, but I am pointing out that it's very important that we have to establish with our threat assessment team, our internal threat assessment team, with a community-wide threat assessment team, so we can connect with law enforcement, nonprofits, houses of worship, and all these other community sources on the left, because a lot of times they have information that you will need to be able to see that bigger picture and take action. Because when you think about those timelines I just showed you, I can almost guarantee you that if a threat assessment team had seen all of that information, they would have taken different action. The problem is it was all scattered, they couldn't see it. So Chris kind of alluded to this as far as a return on prevention. I like to call it return on prevention, but is there a return? Well, it's way better than return on regret, okay? And we're seeing, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of this today because people are realizing that, wow, we had all this information in our organization or in our community, but we didn't act on it. And both return on prevention and return on regret, they can last a lifetime, okay? Now, it's hard to maybe put numbers on return on prevention, but even that, we're starting to realize through data, we can show that lack of action or lack of prevention led to millions of dollars in lawsuits, millions of dollars in maybe reputation damage, all kinds of things. So we're starting to be able to show with data now that return on prevention, there is a return on prevention, and it can be huge. And remember, there's no second chance once a tragedy occurs. So we've got to start taking action today, because we can't sit here and say it won't happen here, because it can happen anywhere. Workplace violence or community violence and things like that, they can impact you. The other thing I really want to focus on real quickly here, though, is the number of at-risk individuals or evildoers or individuals of concern, whatever type of words you want to use to describe these individuals who need help, okay? The thing is, the number of stressors and fears in our world today, I mean, they're soaring, which is creating more and more individuals who are, maybe at risk or exhibiting concerning behaviors and things like that. But the thing is that it was difficult, just based upon the research I've done the last 20 plus years. It was difficult for organizations to keep up before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, there's a lot more stressors, and it's actually overwhelming schools, organizations, and communities. So we need a better prevention model. And that's really what this first preventers model is all about, because if we continue to use the old model, we're going to fall farther and farther behind. And that's pretty obvious when you look at the increase in violence, the increase in shootings, and the things we've seen over at least from statistics for the year 2021. So the profile of failed preventions, it's something I talk about. Annie mentioned this in the bio about the first preventers playbook. I'm not really here to sell you a book or anything like that, but what I do want to point out is that 20 years of research, it's hard to put it down into like 15 minutes or less, right? So if you really want to go and learn more about what all that research is and says and what it does and what we've learned and things like that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Basically, it's out there, and I would like to share that information with you. And that's why it's so exciting for me to work with Chris and Kogniz and Annie and Mike and everybody else that we're teaming up with here, because I'm very passionate about prevention. And that's why we're trying to create this first preventers framework, because we know that through imagination, innovation, and actions, we can get better results. And I just hope if you have any questions, you please submit them so we can get back to you and answer them for you. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Rick and Chris, for joining us and sharing your experience on this challenging topic. As safety and security professionals that are joining us today, I'm sure you're all acutely aware of the velocity with which the threat landscape that we all contend with continues to evolve, and the importance of remaining up to speed and informed of new developments and best practices, and the difficulty in doing that alone, in addition to the 9 to 5, which is never a 9 to 5 anymore. So we hope you find these events beneficial and you'll recommend them to your peers as we continue to bring more experts in other areas of focus here. And we also use these developments to improve our platform. For the next few minutes, I'd like to introduce Kogniz and how we're enabling our customers to reduce risk and hopefully the likelihood and or severity of incidents occurring, and then improving response time and therefore the outcome when they do. I'll provide a general overview of the platform. I'll speak a little bit into the specifics of the context of today's call, and I'll end with some of the more widespread use cases where we're helping customers address challenges in their environments. Following that, we'll have some time for Q&A, and I'll extend the invitation now to anyone joining us that's interested in pursuing some of these discussions further. I'm happy to discuss those with you, and our contact information will certainly be made available to you in the follow-up. So let's talk a little bit about Kogniz. Kogniz is a software as a service company, which essentially means that our services are delivered across the wire to you, or you can think of that through the cloud if that's an easier way to think of it. It means we're really easy to get set up and start working with. We're focused on using technology for good, that is to reduce risk and improve the overall health and safety of spaces by making them smarter and allowing them to work together using artificial intelligence and existing safety systems that are already on site. Computer vision is a specific discipline within AI, and as its name implies, it's enabling computers to monitor a variety of data sources for signals or indications of unsafe conditions, in the same way that a human would interpret certain behaviors or circumstances, essentially empowering you with many more eyes and ears than you might have in your budget today. Faster detection can mitigate an event or lessen its severity, and a faster response once an incident does occur generally results in a better outcome. Our main goals are essentially getting important information to the people that need to receive that information as quickly as possible, and that can happen in a number of ways, one of which is in a digital response plan. This is an interactive emergency guided response in comparison to something that might today exist in a binder on a shelf. Another way is in using our technology to monitor an environment and automatically detecting unsafe conditions or something that has occurred. Then, of course, there's initiating an automated response to an incident, and I'll talk about what those look like here in just a second. And then lastly, the importance is actually testing what these plans are. And we offer a very revolutionary way to do this using artificial intelligence to essentially simulate a variety of situations that might arise in an environment, making a very realistic incident that you can test your plan against, much more effective than running down a checklist. So let's talk about a brief example in the context of today's discussion of how this all comes together. I mentioned there's a few components of the platform that I'll get to in just a second here, but I wanted to give you a narrative of what this might look like from end to end, demonstrating the detection, the automation, and the integration capabilities of our platform. So here we might detect a prohibited person. Perhaps that's a terminated employee, or maybe there's someone that's brandished a weapon in a lobby or in a school. Our system would then activate a notification that would go to the security and leadership team and enable them to make a very quick decision on how they wanted to initiate a response. Certainly contacting the authorities with key information, but also giving them the ability to communicate with affected individuals. That could be a mass communication to everyone in a building or in an area of a building that's affected, informing them to evacuate or perhaps shelter in place, given the nature of the emergency, and then allowing them to respond with their whereabouts and condition using their phone. Taking this a step further, we can integrate with existing systems such as access control, In this case, we might disable access to the building of people that are coming in to work for the day who might be unaware of what's happening inside, preventing them from making entry into the building and finding themselves in the midst of a situation that's unfolding. Most of our customers will begin with a specific use case and evolve their strategy incrementally. So let's talk a little bit about the platform and how it's well suited to consolidate what you might be using multiple solutions for today. I mentioned we're quite comprehensive in our capabilities. Some of the areas that we focus on here as they relate to occupational safety and security are outlined here. Certainly with the pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on things related to vaccination and testing management, social distancing, contact tracing. Beyond that, weather-related incidents. The detections I'll speak about next here on the following slide, but a very comprehensive platform that covers a wide variety and an ever-growing variety of use cases as we continue to work with new customers who present us with unique and interesting challenges that we're able to find innovative technological solutions for. The underlying platform is consistent across all of these use cases, and it uses the same intuitive interface regardless of what you're working with. So the administration is very simple, the configuration is very simple. The ability to make sense of large amounts of data that we're monitoring through visualizations gives you the ability to make informed decisions very quickly. And of course, reporting, whether it's for compliance or whether it's to improve your safety posture, is also very simple with just a few clicks of the button. So I'll conclude my discussion here today with this slide that highlights a number of our capabilities as they pertain to intelligent detections. Everything on the top line here with data signals is using data signals, as their name implies, and delivered right across the wire to you. So this is our ability to monitor or interact with employees or guests and understand the likelihood of unsafe conditions presenting themselves, as well as tying in with existing safety systems. On the bottom line here with computer vision, these are when we might tie into things like a security camera system that you already have in place and enhance that system with artificial intelligence and the ability to detect certain anomalous or prohibited behaviors. From here, we can notify, automate a response, and then make everything reportable. So again, happy to discuss any of this in more detail here as we get into the Q&A or offline with anyone that's interested. Thanks so much.